Hello. Well, I'm giving it a little bit longer to see if some folks show up. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm calling to join the workshop.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, I was a student at MediaTech Houston. And,
Hi.
hello. Can you see me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Has it already got started?
No, we have not had a lot showing up on time, but I've got two people here, so I'm actually going to get started now since you've
Okay.
shown up, and then Megan. Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for joining. Looks like some folks are starting to show up. I'm going to give it just a second.
What's up, y'all?
I was getting worried. Nobody was here at 7. I was like, nobody wants to see my workshop. But I'm glad to have you all here. Oh, good. A couple more people are coming, so I'm going to just give it 2 minutes, and then we're going to get started.
Okay.
I hope y'all are having a wonderful evening. My name is Crystal Givens, by the way. For some of you, again, I recognize some names on here, but some of you I don't know yet, and I hope to get to know you. I am the Business of Music instructor in Dallas at MediaTech Institute, and tonight we're going to be talking about the music copyrights, of which there are 2. And so we should be right at about an hour and a half for this presentation. So I'm going to dig in, and if you have questions along the way, there is a chat in the Google Hangout. If you'll add those questions in the chat, I'll keep an eye on those. I'll pause here and there. But also, if you do have a question, go ahead and ask. Jump on in, because if you have a question, someone else might have that same question, and I'll take a moment and try and clarify. If not, I might go ahead and keep going, and then I will hopefully have some time at the end so that you can re-ask questions, or if you have additional questions that you didn't jump in with, we can address those at the end as well. So there are a lot of copyrights, but the music copyrights we're going to be talking about tonight are specifically for those that create music. And we're going to see that there are 2 ways of creating music. There's the written composition and lyrics, and then there is the recorded version. So those are the 2 copyrights that we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about how you know which one of those copyrights are relevant to you. And then if you are wanting to use music, what are some ways for you to go about licensing that information, or those copyrights? And then finally, we'll wrap up tonight with how do you actually go about securing a copyright. So, like I said, we're going to start with the 2 copyrights, but before we get into that, I'm going to explain a little bit more about what a copyright is, so we understand what this is referring to. So the purpose of copyright is to protect the work of authorship. So you'll hear this term author a lot when you're dealing with copyrights. And that is basically the creator of the original work. A copyright also, in the rules of copyright, is going to differentiate between compilations and derivatives. Compilations mean a group of work. and it can also be called a group of work. And that means you have multiple items that you are registering. But then if you want to create a compilation, like record labels do at times, they'll create a CD, back in the day when CDs were very popular, a CD that has a lot of other people's works on it. And that in itself can have its own copyright as that compilation. And then what is a derivative work? And we are familiar with derivative works every day. When you hear a cover, you're seeing and hearing a derivative. Something to keep in mind too is the copyright is an expression of an idea, not an actual idea. And I like to use the donut shop as an example. You can't copyright the idea of creating and selling donuts. Your interpretation of how you are doing those donuts, that is what you can copyright. It's your expression of the thing, of the idea, your personal spin. The other thing a copyright does, it allows for a natural, and I'm giving some folks some access to the meeting real quick. It allows for artistic creation. So we won't be able to really go into the history of copyright, which is definitely fascinating. And we talk about that a lot in my class at MediaTech when we actually spend about 5 weeks just talking about copyright and licensing and publishing. And to really understand copyright, you do need to have a good understanding of the history, how we ended up with copyright law the way it is today. But the original purpose of copyright was to give the author a small amount of time to create income from their work where no one else could take it away from them. And then after that amount of time, it would then become what we call public domain. Other people could create other things from that work. It's how we have samples. It was a huge part of the hip hop movement, was being able to take other people's works and then create new works from it. However, that has been shut down quite a bit because of copyright. So the purpose of the copyright was to create a natural process for artists to create new things to share. And one thing to remember is that there are things that are created that aren't under copyright. For example, anything that is created by the US government, because we pay taxes, we all own it. So it immediately goes into public domain. And then that leads me to, there are different copyright laws depending on where you're from. So in the United States, we have United States copyright law, but then there are copyright laws that are governed in each individual country or territory. Okay, so what are the two copyrights we're going to be talking about tonight? The two music copyrights are composition, and you'll be familiar with this little circle C. Circle C stands for the composition copyright, and then there's the circle P, which actually stands for phonograph, which equally means sound recording. So there's a lot of terms in copyright, and a lot of these terms actually mean the same thing. For example, composition, when you go and register your copyright at copyright.gov, you're creating a copyright using the Performing Arts copyright.gov form. However, if you're going to file a copyright on your sound recording, you would use the SR, or sound recording form, which also gives you the P. Other terms for a composition could be musical work, and then for sound recording, The other term would be master recording. And we hear this a lot, who owns the master or master recording. So the master reflects the sound recording copyright. The musical work is the composition. So what are these? What is the definition of each? So the composition includes the melody or the melody/music, or the melody/music plus lyrics. So since some pieces of work are instrumentals only, it doesn't always have to be with lyrics. But it wouldn't just be lyrics by themselves, then it would be poetry. So it would be a different type of work, a different type of copyright. And it would not fall within the music copyrights. Now the sound recording copyright is a composition copyright plus a recording. So you would not have a sound recording copyright unless you had an underlying composition to record. Note the sound recording copyright here. The sound recording copyright did not actually come into existence until 1972. Now there were sound recordings prior to that, but they were under different laws and they were considered different copyrights. Again, we would go into much greater detail on that in our class. So let's talk about the composition first. So the composition copyright, who owns it? Well, first, it's the author, and it really is built around the authors. And some of you might have heard the term splits or split sheet. Well, the splits are derived from the composition copyright. And the authors are made up of composers, lyricists, and or songwriters. So what's the difference between the two? Well, a songwriter most often is both a composer and songwriter and lyricist combined. But not everyone is an actual songwriter. Some people are more talented with the composing side, the arranging side, the creation of the melody, while others do really well with writing lyrics, but not really good at the composing of the melody that those lyrics will go with. So you often find in the music industry, composers and lyricists collaborating. But that's not always the case. You do have some that are songwriters, and they do both. Not to say that songwriters can't work with other composers, lyricists not writing with other songwriters. They all kind of work together. So anyone who adds to the creation of the core song structure is an author of the copyright. So I'm going to go back one screen. So the reason why I have this image here, which is sheet music, anyone that places a note or a lyric on this piece of paper, which this exists without the sound recording. The sound recording is the interpretation of the notes and the lyrics that are on a piece of sheet music. So those are the authors of the copyright, if they have added anything to this. Now, who else owns the copyright? Well, we hear about publishers. Well, publishers are associated with authors. And so each author has their own publishing company. Now, some authors might be members, or I'm sorry, not members. They may be clients of the same publishing company. And some authors are even their own publishing company and act as their own publisher. So how much do they own? How does this work? How do you have authors and then publishers? Well, it's interesting because it starts out with 200%, which you don't necessarily hear a lot of. But in composition copyright, it starts with 200%. You have authors splitting 100%, And then their publishers get equal splits. So authors split 100% with equal splits assigned to each author's publisher. So in this graph here, we have 3 authors. Author 1 has 50%, possibly the songwriter, possibly lyrics and song. You have author 2, who might have done quite a bit of the composition, and maybe author 3 that really assisted in the lyrics. So 25, 25, and 50%, all adding up to 100%. So author 1's publisher got equal percentage, exactly the percentage that the author's splits designate. Author 2's publisher got 25%, and the author 3's publisher got 25%. So that's how we arrive at 200% off of really only 100%. I'm just going to check in the chat and see if I've got any questions so far. And welcome everybody for joining. I'm so glad to have everyone here. And again, if you have questions, just jump right in. Otherwise, I'll just keep going, and you can save your questions to the end as well. I hope to have about 15 minutes at the end for that. Okay, so what are the rights of the composition? Well, there's 6 rights for the composition copyright. Number 1, to reproduce. What does that mean? Especially if we are talking about sheet music. I'm going to keep going back to this, the sheet music. So how would you reproduce that? Well, back in the day, before there were sound recordings, they sold sheet music. And so the owner of the composition copyright can print out sheet music and then reproduce that sheet music, but no one else has the right to do that. And we still do have sheet music, believe it or not. Today, you can buy sheet music at the music store like Sam Ash or Britt Mays, but you can also buy sheet music online or get access to a specific sheet music for a certain period of time. You can lease sheet music, but the only one that can allow that is the owner of the composition. Now next, create derivatives based on that work. So if you've written a composition and then you want to take elements of that same composition and create something new from it, only you have a right to do that. Now, if there are 3 people that are all authors of that composition, each of those 3 people do have the ability to do that. Anyone else would not. So when you have someone doing a sample in a sound recording of someone else's sound recording, that sound recording that you are sampling is also a piece of someone else's composition. So you would have to get approval of the folks that own the composition in order to have that sample sound recording on your new sound recording and your new composition. Distribute copies, sound recordings of the work to the public. So the owner of the composition actually has the right to distribute their own copies and sound recordings. So as the owner of the composition, you can make as many sound recordings of that composition as you would like. So I'm going to go back to a little sheet music here. This is sheet music, but I can make multiple sound recordings. In fact, I could do a hip hop version. I could do a bluegrass version. I could do a country version. I could do an instrumental version, assuming that there were lyrics. And I have the right to make copies of each of the actual sheet music for each of those versions, because they could have different arrangements. And I could have, I have the opportunity to make as many of those sound recordings I want, and I can share them and distribute them as much as I want, because I own the underlying composition. I can perform the work publicly. So if I wrote a song, I can, of course, go out and perform it on the street corner and at a venue. I can perform it on the radio. I can place it on my YouTube channel. I have the ability to perform it however I'd like to publicly. I can also display the work publicly, meaning I can take that sheet music and display it. Now, this number 5 actually raises some questions. Why would I be displaying sheet music? So let me give you a couple of examples of that. If a person, an author of a book, wanted to use their character in their book singing lyrics of your song in the book. Say they were in the shower in the book, and the author is writing and saying that the character was singing these lyrics. Well, that means it has to be written. The author of the book would have to get permission to use your song, your lyrics, in their book. So that's an example of that. Perform the work publicly by means of a digital audio transmission. Now, this was added after the other 5. It was added in 1995 with the Digital Performance Right and Sound Recordings Act. There was a new pro that was created for that called Sound Exchange. We're going to talk more about Sound Exchange here in just a little bit. So why are we doing this? To make some money, right? So what are all the revenue streams that you can make and create off of a composition? Well, the composition actually gives you the most revenue streams out of the 2. Everything in the green check marks is something that generates a revenue stream. I have these categorized with terms that you may have heard in the industry. And if you haven't heard them yet, you will. So performance royalties are the oldest and most common for the composition. Now, performance royalties are broken up into 2 different types. There's broadcast and there's non-broadcast. Broadcast means that when people hear it, they can't change what they're hearing. They don't have the ability to go in and choose what song they want to hear next on a specific radio station. Non-broadcast means that you are allowed to make that change. So when you are creating a playlist, say in iTunes, in iMusic, that is interactive digital streaming. Digital broadcast streaming is when you're listening to your radio station on your computer, and it's playing basically the same thing as what you would be listening in your car radio, in your car. So digital broadcast means you don't have the choice. You can't change it. Like Pandora. Pandora will automatically play you the next thing. You can skip it, but you don't have the choice of what you're going to hear next. Broadcast covers radio, TV, and of course live performance as well. When you go to see someone perform live, they are not going to just take requests. They have a set list. So that is also broadcast performance. So performance royalties are being generated every time your composition is performed by sound recording and in a live scenario. All right, next we have product sales. Sheet music we talked about earlier. So if I take my composition and create sheet music, and then it gets purchased wholesale and then sold through Sam Ash, then that is a product sale. It's physical. So I have a check mark there because as we saw in the rights on the previous slide, I have the right to sell my sheet music. Now, why there is an X next to the CD, vinyl, cassette, etc., is because I don't own necessarily the sound recording. Now, if I did, I would own another copyright, the sound recording copyright. And when we get to this screen For the sound recording revenue streams, this will be checked green and sheet music will be checked red. Now, I have a context here. The copyright composition owner does receive mechanical royalties, which comes up here. So for recorded music product, when someone decides to record my composition, they automatically have to pay me mechanical royalties. That's where we get the term mechanical royalties. That's where they come into play. They come into play when a composition is then recorded. In the term mechanical, we actually go into the history of where we get that term in class. I don't necessarily have a lot of time to do that tonight, but hopefully I'll get to know some of you in my class and we can go into that. So mechanical royalties is another revenue stream for the composition. What it does not give you is the recording royalties for the specific sound recording. So I might have a composition. Someone chooses to make a cover, their own interpretation of my composition, and they create a sound recording. When that sound recording then is used, they own that copyright. I don't get those royalties. They do have to pay me every time that they generate income through their sound recording off of my composition. But those are mechanical royalties, not the recording royalties. Hence why the red X is next to recording royalties. Then you have sync licensing, and that covers so much nowadays. But the most common are movies, film, and video. So of course I get mechanical royalties anytime my composition is being utilized in a sound recording synchronized with action on a screen, with any kind of visual. That then generates mechanical royalties for me. What I don't get access to, if I don't own the sound recording, is the recording royalties, which also is generating sync licensing. I've actually provided, because I actually use this screen in one of my classes, an example of a mechanical license agreement. So with everything, there are agreements, lots of contracts. And to know where all of these revenue streams are going from, we have to have paperwork and tracking of it. Which brings me to the last one, other licensing deals. Publishing deals, brand use, ringtones, cards, etc. Basically, anytime my composition is used in any way, format, or recording, they have to get approval. So when I say brand use, the brand of a composition could be created. Someone that uses my music, then with their brand, then a publishing deal can come into play, which we're going to talk a little bit more about publishing. And then dramatic rights is a whole other world because it involves acting on stage in the process of a larger story. And so the composition, if your composition gets placed into a Broadway musical, for example, School of Rock, if any of you are familiar with the movie, there's actually a Broadway version as well. And so not all the songs were written specifically for School of Rock, but some of them were. But the ones that weren't, the negotiations of what that contract and what those royalties would be are quite extensive because it's broken down by how many people are viewing the actual performance, how many pieces of sheet music is used for the orchestra that is playing the music for the performance, how many people actually need the lyrics on paper to be able to learn the music to be performed in the performance. So it gets quite a large amount of negotiation involved and royalties. So let's talk a little bit more about performance royalties. So we talked about broadcast, radio, TV, performance, digital broadcast streaming, and we talked about non-broadcast. So performance royalties were generated by and determined by the Copyright Royalties Board. And it was government regulated back in 1889. In 2018 was the last time that the rates were increased. And it was part of the Music Modernization Act. And luckily, I think in 2020, this year, they will increase slightly once again. The Copyright Royalties Board actually reviews the royalties every 2 to 3 years, and they have a schedule for increase. Performance royalties in the past were the largest income stream for composers, for songwriters. It's been a bit of a struggle for them over the last 15 years, really since mid-2000s. I'd say around 2003, it really took a turn for the worse. Because radio and TV, and primarily radio, was one of their primary income streams. But when the audience shifted and consumers had different consumption methods, then those income streams started to dry up because there was no true regulation for all those new income streams. We hear about this a lot, still to this day. And it's because it's so difficult to track streaming from Pandora or iHeartRadio or iTunes. The industry is hoping that the Music Modernization Act that was passed in December of 2018, so a little over a year ago, will be the first thing to really start to change the tide, turn the tide. We actually will talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in this presentation. So who collects performance royalties? You might have heard of the term pro. So pros, do you have a pro? You know, a lot of people ask that. Who's your pro? Well, pro stands for Performance Rights Organizations. And US has their own pros, and each country/territory has their own pros. There are a couple that are newer, actually within the last 10 years, that are global. And they are coming out as in response to this new global market we have. ASCAP, right here, ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC are all United States, and they are, and also global music rights is global. But they're a little bit more old school in the way that they are split between authors and publishers. So an author-songwriter needs to pick one pro. And then the publisher for that author or songwriter must also join that pro. Now, publishers, they can join multiple pros. They can be a member of ASCAP, BMI, Global Music Rights, CSAC, and AllTrack. An author can only join one and only wants to join one. The reason a publisher can join all of them is because they may represent different authors, and those authors may be members of the different pros. So whatever pro a publisher's authors are members of, they also need to join. So if you're an author and you're acting as your own publisher, then you need to join as an author as well as join as a publisher to that pro. Now, there's a new pro on the block called AllTrack. They started about 2 years ago, and they are a bit of an answer to this odd author publisher scenario that not a lot of new do-it-yourself, new medium artists understand. So many new do-it-yourself artists are acting as their own publishers by default. They don't even realize that they're acting as their own publisher. And so the old business model of ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, where it's absolutely split between authors and publishers, just doesn't make sense. And so Altrek addresses that. They are an author pro, assuming the authors are also publishers. It's very unique. So the pros represent copyright owners, and they collect and distribute the performance royalties. So all of these performance royalties are collected by these guys for the author and the publisher. So I can't have a conversation about pros without talking about sound exchange. And I mentioned sound exchange in the breakdown of revenue streams underneath product. So a sound recording up until 2002 never received any kind of performance royalty, even when their music was being played on the radio. And sadly, that's still the case. And I think it might help if I go back here. So in fact, I'm going to go one more. So sound recordings do not receive any of this, even though that's what you're hearing. So when you turn on the radio, you're hearing a sound recording, but the sound recording copyright owners do not receive any of the performance royalties from that. They receive no money from radio stations. That's probably the most shocking thing that people learn in their first few days of the first few weeks of my class. Well, that changed somewhat in 2002. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998 updated the copyright law, and it recognized sound recordings, but it was only able to recognize sound recordings with digital. So any music that is streaming, any music that is streaming radio or streaming platforms now has to go through sound exchange so that the sound recording owners are able to receive a performance royalty. So why did sound exchange have to be created? Well, let's go back. The US pros, ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC are created and built. Their entire business model is set up for these two individuals. Their mechanism for negotiating how much is received in royalties from each of those performance providers, the radio, the TV, it was all based on just the author and the publisher. It was based off of the copyright. So their systems don't even know who the recording artists are or the labels. They don't collect any information on sound recording. So if they collected all this money, negotiated, it was only for these two owners right here. So when the the Digital Millennium Copyright Act came out, they weren't set up. They had no infrastructure to be able to collect any additional income. So they had to create some entity that would start collecting in their database the owners of sound recordings. So that would be the labels, that would be the owners, anyone that owned the master recording. Also, there is an additional income stream that's for non-royalty artists. So your musicians and songwriters, so session musicians, session vocalists, which that's kind of a side conversation. We're not going to be able to get into all of that tonight, but there's additional income streams for those folks too that is collected out of Sound Exchange. All right, so what did the pros do? They issue blanket and sourced performance licenses. So when I said negotiating, they talk to a network, like a channel TV network. They talk to radio stations, and they identify their listenership, what their range is. A lot of different data sets go into determining how much they are to pay in their performance license. And a blanket license means that the radio station pays one single amount on a predetermined cycle, so quarterly, maybe annually, and it covers all artists for that pro. So ASCAP will grant a radio station a blanket license for all ASCAP artists. Sourced performance licenses mean the radio station, and this would be a much smaller radio station, would want to go and just play certain artists. They would go directly to either the pro, and sometimes they'll go directly to the publisher and create a sourced performance license, but sidestep the pro altogether. That's how Alltrack got involved. So Alltrack does sourced performance licenses as well as blanket performance licenses. So the pros go create those performance licenses. They collect the royalties from those licenses, and then they distribute out those royalties to the artists, the authors, and their publishers. And it's about $2 billion annually. It's a lot of money. They also monitor marketplace data. So they want to always be looking to see, is everybody paying what they should be paying? So I talked about radio stations, I talked about TV, but there's also venues. So everything from your small, neighborhood bar all the way up to AT&T Stadium. They all have a license if they want to legally perform music in their establishment. So that's where the pros have to monitor. And so they'll send people out to make sure that certain venues actually have a license and are paying the license. So how are the royalties distributed? How do they know who gets what out of all that $2 billion that they get in? Well, that's what sets each pro apart. So ASCAP has a proprietary formula that they determine how they distribute royalties to their artists. BMI has their system, CSAC has theirs, Alltrack has theirs. Every one of them have their own. That's what separates them. That's how you, to a certain degree, have to decide which one you want to join. So, foreign collections. How are foreign collections handled? As I mentioned, ASCAP and BMI and CSAC, they handle and create licenses for radio stations and venues here in the United States. But what if your music is played overseas? How do you get that money? Well, your publisher. That is why the publisher is so important. And a lot of people don't realize that. They don't realize the value of a publisher. And today, there's nothing wrong with, in fact, I advocate for it, that we should be trying to do as much as we can on our own. We have the technology, as they say in the $1 Million Man. We have the technology, but do you have the time? Do you have the skill set? Do you have the patience, the contacts to do everything that a publisher does? And once you get to a certain level with your career, you're going to need someone else to track down anything that's going on overseas. And sub-publishers are just an example of that. So your publisher will do a sub-publishing deal with a publisher in a foreign country that then collects foreign performance royalties. And there's a, I don't know for certain if it's called a treaty or not, the Berne Convention. It's a treaty that multiple and the majority of countries and territories have all agreed to so that this can happen. Now, not every country, like North Korea, for example, is a member of the Berne Convention. And China is another one that is not a member of the Berne Convention. So it's going to be more difficult in some countries for you to get your royalties. But that's what a publisher does. All right. So how do the pros collect the money? Well, I kind of talked about this earlier, but I wanted to give one more slide just to give to kind of bring it all home. So they collect license fees. They collect those fees based on what the consumption method is. So here are the consumption methods. So broadcast radio, TV, bars, restaurants, retail. So when you go into a clothing store and they have music playing, they have a license to play that music. Bars, restaurants, anywhere you go and there is music being broadcast that you can hear. The grocery store, they have a license. Those are all consumption methods. Arenas, concerts, and then digital streaming. So those are our primary consumption methods. And even with all of these, there is a broad range as to the size of audience they have. And so depending on the audience, listeners, the time, the date, all of that determines what that license fee is going to be. So the pros handle all of that, and then they distribute based on what they've collected. And as I mentioned, what that formula is, that's the proprietary information of the pro. So I've got a little graph here. This is an example of a performance royalty split. So this is a split for the composition. Remember, we're still talking about the composition. We are not talking about sound recordings yet. So in this example, I have a lyricist. I have a composer 1, composer 2, composer 3. Now, this lyricist may also be a vocalist. Composer 1, well, he might be, he or she may be also acting as the producer. The composer 2 may be the vocalist, may also be doing some backing vocals, but they're also helping with the arrangement. So they have a part of the split as well. And then you have composer 3 with 10%. And in this scenario, who knows, maybe this was the engineer that had a really great idea, and the lyricist, composer, and composer 1 and composer 2 decided, you know what, this song would not be what it is without the engineer's input, on that one hook. So they decided to go ahead and give the engineer a 10% split. What's important here is note the titles I've given. I did not call composer 1 a producer. I did not call lyricist 1 the recording artist or the vocalist. I did not call composer 3 the engineer, because they are getting paid to be a vocalist. They're getting paid to be the engineer. They're getting paid to be the producer. Those are different roles. They are not the same roles as what you apply to a composition. When you are talking about the composition copyright, you are talking about the roles of the composers. And I'm going to go all the way to the very front first. Who owns the copyright? Composer, lyricist, and songwriter. I do not have producer, engineer, and vocalist for a reason. Now, they can be those things, but that's a completely different contract, and it's associated with the sound recording. So it's very important that we get that understood. And that's one of the reasons why I spend about 5 weeks. The first 5 weeks of my class, we spend on copyright. All right. So we've got our authors. They split it by 100%. And then over here we have their publishers. So lyricist 1 has an old school publisher. Composer 1 has his own, his or her, and he calls it Killer Beats. Composer 2 does not have a publisher because he or she is not normally a composer. He's actually a lead or normally a vocalist, but he came in and actually did some composition. And then the engineer rarely is on a split. He's an engineer by trade. So he doesn't have a publisher. He doesn't need one. So there's a difference between how pros pay out. And that is why I actually included the pro. So engineer, we're going to start with this engineer. The engineer has never been on a composition split before. Well, hopefully the lyricist and composer up here actually explains that, hey, we're going to put you on the split. You really need to join a pro so that you can get your performance royalties. Because if this is going to blow up, you're not going to get any money because the pro is going to be collecting the composition royalties every time the sound recording is played. Don't you want it? Heck yeah. So he or she needs to become a member of the pro. Problem is, you really should have joined BMI because BMI only pays the publisher's portion to a publisher. If you don't have a publisher, they hold on to it. Now the composer up here, he's with BMI, doesn't have a publisher, but BMI actually pays that check back to the author if there's no publisher associated with the pro. So that's just an example of really understanding which pro you want to be a member of. Now, I'm not saying that BMI is better than ASCAP or vice versa, because ASCAP actually, if you talk to different people, ASCAP pays out more because remember we have a proprietary formula in how they pay things out. And so if you're a songwriter and you're a member of ASCAP, you actually might make more money than you would if you were with BMI, but it really depends. And we don't know the actual formula. A lot of my friends are actually BMI and they love BMI. BMI actually gives you a little bit more hands-on. You can actually get a hold of someone a little bit quicker with BMI than you can with ASCAP, but I've heard the vice versa. You've got to do your own research. You do your research and then you make your determination of which one you want to join. And then there's All-Track, which I really like the idea of All-Track because you're going to get on the phone with one of the, not the board, but not the owners, senior management, because they are still so young. I mean, I can get on the phone with the lead of a new client development within 3 days if I want to. So that's really cool. And you don't even have to be a publisher. They just go directly to author. They don't even have the publisher option. So the point of this is just to show how authors and splits work. And these, I've also got a little disclaimer down here. The dollar amounts would not be reflective because of that proprietary formula. This is just trying to show the 15-15, the example of what it might look like. Okay. So global collection societies. I mentioned, the ASCAP, BMI, CSAC is the United States. And then you have All-Track and Global Music Rights. Well, there are global collection societies worldwide, and there are so many. In fact, there are hundreds. I actually, in class, have a long list, and I will share it with my students, of every single pro and collection society worldwide for all mediums within media. So including film, music, you name it. And it's about 4 pages long. It's in like itty bitty print. But that explains, the amount of work that's involved in being a publisher. All right. So we are right at 8 o'clock. And I'm kind of right where I was hoping to be at 8. We're about to go into sound recording, but I wanted to open up and ask if anybody had any questions with what we've gone over so far with composition. And I'm looking at my chat, but I'm not seeing anyone have any questions. Nobody have any questions? Y'all are tracking? Just silence. Okay, well, good. I'm glad everybody's tracking along with me. All right, so sound recording.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I'm happy to hear one.
Will any of these notes be on PDF or email afterwards?
So that is a great question. I will the recording will be posted on YouTube. I don't know exactly when, but this whole recording will be posted.
Okay.
But thank you. That's a great question. All right, so let's talk sound recording. All right, so as I mentioned, we first start with a composition. A sound recording does not exist without a composition first. And so you have your composition, but then one composition could have, and I've got here, 5 sound recordings, but it could be hundreds. However many times you want to reinterpret how you think this composition can sound. So like I explained in the very beginning, we can have a hip hop version, you can have, bluegrass, country, multiple different variations of instrumentals, all of that. So the sound recording does not exist without the composition, but then there can be multiple sound recordings, and each of those sound recordings can have different owners. And each of those sound recordings owners may not be the owner of the composition. There are a lot of songwriters that never do a sound recording of their song. They only create compositions. And then their publishers go out and market those songs to producers, to labels, to recording artists, to performing artists. So some songwriters, of course, do have recordings of their composition, but they're not the actual sound recording that is published, meaning it is released to the public for public consumption. So that's what we're talking about when we talk sound recordings. So who owns that copyright, the sound recording copyright? Artists. So notice my terminology is changing. With composition, I'm calling them authors. When I'm going to be talking about them as a sound recording, I'm going to use the term artist. And to be even more specific, there's a recording artist, performing artist. So that is the person that's going to be on the recording contract, of which there are many recording contracts. There's recording contracts between the label and the recording artist. There's a recording contract between a publisher and a label, or a publisher and a recording artist. There's a contract between a publisher and a studio. There are contracts between, I'm sorry, did I say publisher? Producer. I meant to say producer, sorry. So there's the recording contract between a producer and a label, or recording artist, producer and studio, potentially, producer and musicians, so session musicians that may be with a union, with backing vocalists, with engineers. So there's a lot of recording contracts. But the one that we're most familiar with are the recording artists or performing artists. So the artist And the reason why I have to put author next to that is because of copyright.gov. When you actually register your copyright, they call the owner or artist author. Are you confused yet? Okay, well, sometimes that can get confusing, but what I choose to go with in the presentation is what the common term is in the industry. So in the industry, the recording artist, the one that's involved with the sound recording, is an artist. You hear these other terms when you're actually on copyright.gov, and many artists never even touch copyright.gov. They have a publisher do it or the label do it. So I just put the author in there just in case you're on copyright.gov and you're looking back through here and like, but it says author. Okay, so artist of the music recording may not be the same as a composition. We talked about that. Artist is the recording artist. And when you're recording, registering your copyright for a sound recording, the artist never changes. So the artist is the name, like on the, when you go into a record store and you're looking for a particular sound recording, where do you go? You go alphabetical usually. Well, go to genre, what genre you think, and then you go alphabetical, and then you look for the recording artist's name. So that is what I'm talking about here. This information never changes. It's always going to be the sound recording by Tori Amos or Adele. It's always going to be Adele. That doesn't mean she owns the master recording, right? The master recording is owned by the claimant. So at the very beginning, when you're creating your composition or your sound recording copyright, you put in the author, and then copyright.gov assumes that the author is the artist, unless told otherwise. In the unless told otherwise is the claimant. It'll say, so who is the claimant? And it'll automatically have the artist populated. You have to choose, it is not the claimant, it is owner of the master, which will be the label. Oh, well, it could be the artist. But if it's not the artist, it could be the label, which is back in, the heyday of the music industry. It was almost always the label, because the label was the one, funding the entire recording. And so mostly labels were the claimants. Today, producers could be the claimant. The producer may be the one that is footing the bill. It could be an executive producer, which is basically the person footing the bill that may not be on the recording. But whomever owns the master is the claimant. Now, the last bullet here, employer, if work for hire. So there's a whole nother side of this, and that is when you work in business music. So corporate, agency work, advertising. When, for example, if Coca-Cola were to hire you to write a jingle for them, a song for them, that would be a employer scenario where not always is the artist even going to be on the copyright. But that's a whole nother industry side, which we talk about that in my class, Music Business 2, which is my second semester of music business. So the claimant, the artist could, there's scenarios where that could be an employer and the artist isn't on there as the artist. Oh, all right. So the claimant, we kind of talked about this a second ago. The thing that we didn't go into in the previous slide is entity copyright is transferred to. So the claimant can change numerous times. So the claimant may be the artist at first, and that happens a lot nowadays. And when they sell the master or lease the master, you could lease a master and its full rights, and then the label claims ownership for that period of time. And then once that time is up, then the copyright is transferred again. So a copyright for a master can change hands multiple times. So that's the copyright transfer process. All right, so just as the composition has 6 sound recording composition rights, the sound recording also has those same rights, just a little different. So reproduce the sound recording in copies. They can reproduce their own sound recording. They can't reproduce another sound recording of that composition. If somebody else did it, owns the master, they can only reproduce their sound recording of that song. Now, if they do a sound recording, they have to then pay the composition owner. They can create derivatives of the sound recording, samples. So if they want to do a brand new song and use a sample of an already existing recording that they own, then they can do that. They still have to, with this new sound recording that they sampled their other sound recording on, they do still have to get permission of the composition owner if it's not them. Now you start to see a picture, I hope, with the complexity that happens when you have a lot of have a song, a sound recording that has a lot of other elements of other existing songs. You get to see an idea of all the people that you need to get approval on to clear music. If you don't get the clearance, then you can get sued. And if you don't know who owns the underlying composition of a sound recording that you want to sample in your new song, they can come after you. So this is where clearances today, in this era of everybody being able to lease beats and create music and sample music and put it out there without it going through the old school gatekeepers, then you're going to run into some issues. I'm just seeing some folks may still. Okay, so derivatives. Again, derivatives are samples, reuses of something that already exists. That's where derivatives come from. Distribute. I can take my sound recording, press it, and put it out there for the world to hear. I can do that with my own sound recording, but I cannot do that with other people's sound recordings. But I can only do that for the sound recording, right? So what I cannot do is take my sound recording and then create brand new sheet music of that sound recording and promote it as my sheet music. That is not valid. That is why distribute copies of the sound recording, that word is very important here. Just because you have ownership of the sound recording copyright does not give you rights to the underlying composition. Perform the sound recording publicly. So this is interesting because the sound recording, this isn't important because what do you mean sound recording publicly? Because when a performing artist is on stage, they are performing it live. They're not performing the sound recording, right? So what does that mean? I have the right to do the sound recording publicly. Well, when the sound recording artist is performing the song live, they are actually doing the composition, not the sound recording. They're performing it live, so that falls under what? Performance royalties for the composition. So performing the sound recording publicly means I can play the sound recording publicly without having to pay the composition. Very rarely does that happen, but like a listening party, if you were to do a listening party, you have now the right to perform the sound recording, play the sound recording, and not pay anyone for that sound recording. I know we're starting to get into some gray areas, right? Well, when you take my class, you realize that there's a lot of gray areas in the industry. But the more you know, knowledge is power. All right, so display the sound recording publicly. So this is another one. What do you mean by display sound recording? Well, the other part of a copyright, and I mentioned this at the very, very beginning, when a label puts out a compilation, that compilation becomes a copyright. Nobody else can reproduce that compilation, and you can market it. So that composition, the artwork for the album that you're marketing, that sound recording, you and only you have the right to market that sound recording as your own. Perform the sound recording publicly by means of digital audio transmission. So this one falls into the Sound Exchange, Digital Performance Right in Sound Recordings Act of 1995. So it does apply here too. Now that you can get performance royalties. So those are the 6 sound recording rights. Note, underlying composition rights exist first. So if I were to ask you the question, where would you generate the majority more income streams? From the composition or from the sound recording? Now, that's one of those, well, it depends, Ms. Gibbons. It depends. If you are from the composition side, though, you have the opportunity of every single rewrite, re-recording of that song. So you have way more revenue streams as the composition owner than you would the sound recording owner. Those rights are underlying. Okay. So now those revenue streams that I just mentioned. Going back to our composition revenue streams, broadcast was all green here for the composition. Remember? Not so on sound recording. They don't get any of this. Still to this day. However, they do get digital. They don't get product, sheet music, but they do get CD, vinyl, cassette, etc. because they own sound recording. They will get all of that. The owner of the composition just gets mechanical royalties, which are right here. Recording gets the recording royalties. And then same with sync licensing as the composition. It's just reversed. And then, of course, licensing deals. All of this is highly negotiable. All right. So that brings me to the last portion, and that is copyright.gov. So where and how do you go about registering your copyright? You have a composition. And today we have compositions being recorded all at the same time. So what happens? Do you have to do 2 different copyrights? No, you don't. Meaning you go in, it's going to ask you questions. And I'm going to hope that copyright.gov is actually working tonight. not that, because it has been going down lately. And I think that's because so many artists are at home in COVID containment, that they're writing so much music, and they're like, oh, I finally have time to go in and copyright my works. So let's see. And the office buildings are actually closed. But okay, so we are going to kind of walk through this a little bit. So you want to register your copyright, and there's a couple steps to this. And it's something new they've added, and that is that you can do groups of works still, but they have limited it to 10. So you can do 10 unpublished works on the same application. Well, application, I think, is $60 to do it online. I highly recommend waiting until you have at least 10 pieces of work, because otherwise, every single time you submit, it's $60. So 60 times 10, it's a lot of money. So that's a lot of money saved. What is that, $600 versus $60? So collect up to 10 items and then register them all at once. That doesn't mean that you have to publish them all at once, meaning you don't have to put them out as an album. What you do is, if you're going into the studio and you've got 10 songs ready to go, that's when you may be thinking, and this is a singles world now, so you might be releasing 6 of them over the course of the next 10 months. You might even do 3 singles and then release an EP, or you might release 2 singles and then release all 10. If you are going to release an album of 12, then yeah, you're going to have to do 2 registrations. You're going to have to do the 10 and then do another group of 2, if that's all you have. But still, that's cheaper than, what is that now? If you did 8 at $60, wait, 10. Don't get me to doing math. I'm not a fan of math. But you can see the math is, it's cheaper to do a collection. Okay, so you do a group of 10. You have the option of doing the composition and the sound recording at the same time. Now, you can only do that if you are the composition owner and the sound recording owner as well at the same time. If not, only the composition owner or the composition owner's publisher can do the composition's copyright. Otherwise, you can do composition. It's going to ask, are you also wanting to do a sound recording at the same time that you're doing the composition? And you can do that. Again, saving quite a bit of money. If you're the composition owner and you're also going to be doing a sound recording later on, then don't go and register your composition and then do the sound recording. That's wasting money. In fact, that would be how much? We did 10 compositions and 10 sound recordings. Okay, we're getting 600. That's $1,200 for $60. Pamela, I'm cracking you up. I can see it. All right, so be smart. Just think about what you're doing, and try and collect as much as you can, and then go in here and start the registration process. Let's see. It's been a while since I've done this. So another thing is there's different options. So there's literary work. So if you were doing poetry, we talked about this earlier, why are lyrics and not a composition? Well, lyrics that are applied to a composition, meaning a melody, arrangement, music, then is a composition. Otherwise, it's poetry, and so it would be under literary works. So, performing arts. And by the way, copyright.gov is going through a complete rework for the registration process. It is not highly intuitive. See? COVID. I blame COVID. So I was a little afraid of this. It was working earlier today when I tested it, and now I'm telling you it's 8:30, and so a ton of people are online registering. I guarantee it. So we're gonna have to just we're gonna have to follow along with me. And I do have some little links. So on copyright.gov, you can go to different areas to learn more information. Now, the entire copyright law is extremely extensive. There's a lot to it. If you're really wanting to read it, it's great if you're having trouble going to sleep at night. But there's a lot of good information, and so I've provided links to specific sections where you can find more information that might be relevant to you. So notices on printed music and phono records. So when do you put the little circle C and the little circle P? So that would be in sections 401 and 402. Notice errors. Oh, and over time, that has changed. So you do not have to put that on music and to have a copyright. That was actually changed, I think, in 1972, where you do not have to do that anymore. So notice errors or omissions. So what if you go through this entire process and you misspelled somebody's name, or you misspelled the name of your song, or something along those lines? What do you do? So there's sections in the copyright law that talk about that, and they tell you what to do. Mandatory deposit. So when you register, they need to have proof of what it is that you're registering. So there are specific things that you have to submit to say, yes, this is exactly the copyright. These are all the words. These are the lyrics and the music. For sound recording, it's the master. Well, this is the sound recording. So what does that look like? What do you how do you go about sending that, especially if you're doing this online? And what if you want to do your copyright, but you want to send that in later? So they have a section 407 for that. And then the actual registration process takes up 408, 409, 410, 411, 412. So what I was actually going to try and show you with the registration process, it's a decision tree. It's in a lot of decision trees. And so the first time that you go in to register, you need to set aside about 2 hours. You know, give yourself some time. It's not something that you're going to go in there and be done in 15 minutes, especially the first time, because it's a form, and then it's going to ask you questions. Do you want to do this, or do you want to do this? And then you choose that. And then there's different decisions that you have to make. It's like a long comic book story where you get to actually choose the ending, and there's 30 different choices to make. So take the time, put this time aside to actually do your registration. And if it takes that time just to do your first one, if you're registering 10 compositions and 10 sound recordings at the same time, you get the picture. It takes some time. That's why publishers come in handy. Okay, so the other tip I can give you about registration is as much information as you can obtain before going into the registration process. Do that. Have all your ducks in a row. Have your split sheet there. Have everybody's name. That's why having a good split sheet is so important. When I mean a good split sheet, I mean, and I give you a template for that in my class. I have templates for just about everything. But I'll give you a good split sheet template that asks for all the information that you're going to need for the registration process, so that everybody who all was on the record, on the recording, on the composition. So having addresses, zip codes, all that fun stuff. Fees, yeah, it costs. It's the government. Nothing is free, even when they say it's free. So the fees for all copyright services are in section 708. Yay, it goes on and on. And let's see, and I think I have links to everything. Oh, group of unpublished work. So this is also, they just did this. They just did this video within the last year. But it will walk you through the process of registering, and you can access that at copyright.gov too. And as soon as you hit here, so this is the homepage of copyright.gov. Click on register. And I want to say the video is right in here. Yep, there it is. Of course, they didn't change. This is not ADA compliant, by the way. I used to work in web development for a long time, and that should be a completely different color so that you can see this if you're visually impaired. All right. So I've covered just about everything. I do have time for questions, though. All right, I'm going to ask you guys a question. How many of you have gone through this process? Anyone? Dream in Color. I love the name, by the way. All right, Platinum. Are you planning on it? Are you excited to spend a couple of hours with copyright.gov? I'm hoping that you're excited about owning your own copyright, though. That is an amazing thing. And for all of you that are writers, composers, my primary tip, recommendation, suggestion is write, continually write. You do not have to do a copyright for everything that you write, though. You don't copyright, like if you are a writer, then you're probably writing, sometimes 50 songs in a week. Do you go and copyright every single one of them? No. There, with everything you write, there are those songs that you're like, okay, I'm gonna shop this one, or I'm gonna go record this one, or I want to share this one and have someone else record it. It's at that point you go and copyright it. If you're a composer, it's when you're ready to shop it, that you're ready to share it with the public. So there's a thing called fixed, and what is a copyright exists without even going to copyright.gov. You do not have to go to copyright.gov to have a copyright. If you have created something and it is complete in your eyes and you're ready to even share it with someone else, and say, this is the thing that I've created, this is the song I've created. You might not be ready to share it and publish it to the public, but you're ready to share it and say, okay, I'm ready for other people to record it. It's fixed. It's called fixed. And a copyright exists upon fixation. It is completed by the author. Copyright.gov is your insurance. Copyright.gov and registering your copyright with them is to protect you against other people claiming that thing that you've created and you are sharing with the public. So if someone else takes your sound recording and then puts it into their song, you could go sue them, and you could even win. Take them all the way to court and win. But if you don't have a copyright.gov copyright, then they do not owe you legal fees, and they do not owe you court fees, which that could be all the money that you won could go and just pay off court fees and legal fees. That is the protection of copyright.gov. That is the primary protection of copyright.gov. It is the insurance in case anyone ever tries to take that which is yours. Does that make sense? I'm reading a chat. Is it Megan or Megan? Megan, right? And she just joined back. So amazing to see you. Good to see you too. I'm so glad you're here. I am that lyricist that has trouble with composing. There are many of you. I know you said if you are going to make a sound recording to wait on getting copyrights. If I network with different musicians, composers, is it typically safe for me to proceed with them without protecting my lyrics? Don't want to waste money, but also feel like some people may be sketchy. LOL. Absolutely. Well, here's the thing. You have a fixed copyright, right? If you know which ones that you're willing to share. This is the thing that does make it difficult for a lyricist. Because lyrics are difficult. You need to be, kind of careful with them. Because you could just say them it's your word against theirs, right? If you are in the collaboration process, you should feel confident being in a collaboration process with them. And then you have that split sheet that I gave you. And that split sheet has their signature. And then you can put those lyrics with that split sheet. That is your covering, right? That is the thing that you can hold on to. And then when you are writing your lyrics, I highly recommend putting them in electronic format. So for example, Google Docs, put your lyrics in there and you've got a time signature. So again, it's fixed. And if you had those fixed prior to your session and they signed off on, hey, we are collaborating, then you do that up front, as you're collaborating. As soon as the song is done, you're good. And just being careful. I hope I'm answering this right. If I network with different musicians, composers, is it typically safe for me to proceed with them without protecting my lyrics? If you're proceeding with them, then you are writing music and you should be developing a split sheet. And as soon as you're done, you have them sign off. If they're not willing to sign off, then at that point, that you are in trouble, that they were sketchy. I would go and copyright those immediately. Because more than likely, if they're sketchy like that to begin with, they're not really up to speed on copyright, and even know the value of going in, and because it's $60, so you kind of just go with your gut. I'm sorry I don't have a better real answer for that. I hope that helped. Does anybody have a similar question like that?
Not similar, but I do have a question.
Okay.
You said, I think you said it, if we just have like lyrics, we can submit them as
Poetry?
Literature?
Literature, yeah.
Yeah, so if we have like, let's say that plus like an MP3 recording, is there a spot we can upload our MP3 within the copyright to be like, hey, this is the complete song together? Or does it have to be?
Well, no, that is your composition.
Okay.
If you have even a slight melody, if you have something very basic with your lyrics, that's the composition. You know what I mean? Lyrics, if you are doing lyrics, that means that there's a melody involved, right?
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's poetry, right? That you are hoping to put with a song at some point, but then
Mhm.
you've got to go and look for a composer for that. But at that point, there's no melody, there's no composition. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I mean, so would I still upload it under literature?
No. I mean,
Okay.
if you have music, a melody, then it's going to go under composition. It's
Okay.
it's performing arts. You're
Okay,
performing it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just concerned because I don't have the sheet music for like my songs.
If I understand, then you don't have to have sheet music to upload a composition. Yeah, no, it can be an audio recording of it.
Okay, that
Yeah,
got it.
yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
That's part of, that's a great question, actually, because that's part of the mandatory deposit. Because not
Okay.
everybody knows, so many people do not know how to actually take the thing that they have just created and copy. It's called, that's what copyists do. Not everybody's a copyist. Nobody can write music. When I say write music, meaning notes.
Yeah, I can't.
Yeah, and that's a good majority of songwriters today.
But I can compose like in my
Right.
sleep, you know?
Yeah.
So
then that makes sense. That would means you have a recording of it, but it's not a sound recording that you're going to go out and market.
right.
It's not a master.
Right.
It's your example of your song.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I gotta do more digging, but that helps.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? There are definitely some names on here I don't recognize, so that's exciting. I hope I'm going to be seeing you in our next semester. Are some of you enrolled? I have a feeling some people are on mute. Okay.
I am officially re-enrolled.
Do what? You're officially re-enrolled?
Yes.
Awesome.
All right.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing you again.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to come back.
You haven't graduated yet.
I know. I just want to come back.
Oh, good. Oh, there you are, Megan. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you.
Is some of this coming back to you, ringing a bell? It's been a while.
Yes, it has been a while. Yeah, it's a really good refresher. I'm glad I did it because I was looking through old notes from semester 1, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything anymore.
That happens. I mean, it's, you know, we cover so much. It's getting back into it every semester for me, every 15 weeks. You know, it changes too. Things change, like just since Pam, since you were in class, the Music Modernization Act. So
yeah, no, I wanted to sit in on this because of that, because it's a good, like Megan just said, it's a good refresher. And I've been out of like the music stuff for a while with the podcast, and I'm like, I need to get back in this. And yeah, it's good stuff.
It's really fun because there's so much opportunity once you understand all the paths. And what was I going to say? It has to do with, oh yeah, so producers and engineers, and the fact that now they will, see, and I didn't have that in this. I didn't know how much time I was really going to have. But we also have the Music Modernization Act that, and the, oh gosh, what is it? It's the, did I include it in here? It is the Music, not consortium, committee. I've been doing research on it, and I just totally am. Let me look at my. Yeah, let's see if I have it in here. The Mechanical Licensing Collective. So what that is what all of the streaming platforms and music digital platforms are all going in and funding, and that is the database that's going to be Sound Exchange basically on steroids. It's going to have every data ownership association, anyone that is affiliated with any composition and any sound recording all in one database. And so that means it's a single place that then everyone will go to license music to use. So all the money goes into one place and then gets filtered out to sound recording. So what I was talking about earlier with the pros, you know, that they only handled authors and publishers. And then you have Sound Exchange that just handles recording artists. Now there's going to be one database that handles everything. And I was just seeing if I had the link, and I don't, but I'm going to pull it up. Mechanical Licensing Collective. There it is. So 6 months ago, we didn't even have a website. So now there's a website. Now it's talking about what this thing is going to be and how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to launch in January of 2021. Yeah, starting in January 21. It should be able to start administering blanket licenses, which that's less than a year away. It blows my mind that they're going to be able to pull that off. For every single piece of data. That is, I think, their biggest hurdle right now is collecting all of the information on every recording. It's quite the undertaking. Okay, I just got another chat. Okay, Julene, I hope I'm saying that right. Came in late, may have missed this. If a singer covers a song, are there permissions if they release the song for free versus permission to release for payment? Yes, and that is called compulsory. So a composition owner generates money whenever music is their song, a recording of their composition song is played elsewhere. So if you do a cover, then they should receive royalties from that. Whether it's you are giving it away for free, they aren't. So they have to either give you permission to release it for free, or they are going to give you permission to release it for payment. And there are organizations that can help you with that. If you're doing a cover and you don't know who to contact, which you would contact their publisher. But if they are represented by like Harry Fox Agency is an administrator for getting those types of rights, licenses. So you go to Harry Fox Agency, find out if they represent whoever wrote that song, and then they can arrange the license for you. Rumblefish, Songfile is another one, and Rumblefish. No, Songfile. So who are they? So as a singer, you would contact Songfile. Songfile is actually owned by Harry Fox Agency. So they can help you. And again, they're owned by Harry Fox Agency. Good question. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
I wonder, this might be a completely different, I don't know, like a tribute band or cover band or tributes. Do they need to obtain some kind of licensing?
Yes. So there's official tribute bands, and then there are unofficial tribute bands. So if they are going to do a recording of their versions, their covers, then that's compulsory. If they are going to just perform, then if they are performing at a venue, the venue is responsible for the performances, for the performance royalties. If they are marketing by the name, so let's say they're a Cars tribute band, right? But they go by Candy-O. So that means that they aren't going and promoting themselves as the Cars. So they're not infringing upon their trademark, the Cars trademark. But if they are promoting themselves as a Cars tribute band going by Candy-O, they can potentially get sued by the brand, the Cars, because of a trademark infringement. So they should let them know, or the Cars could come and say, give them a cease and desist. Usually the original performing artist won't care. And the reason why they won't care is because they are generating performance royalties. Every time their music is played, they're getting money. So that's a good thing. So artists want bands playing their music in venues because then it gets reported and they get income.
That's cool.
It's how they market it.
That's cool.
Answer?
100%. Thank you.
Cool. That's why tribute bands are so big, because you can get away with it. As long as you're not recording, as long as you're not doing your, you're creating a recording and then marketing it. So a tribute band cannot take a video that somebody did of them performing the covers and then put it on their channel.
So they couldn't re-record. I'm just trying to understand. They can't re-record the original song, put it to video, and then put that on their website without having a compulsory license or something.
Exactly, because that would then be what?
A
sync license, because they have paired the music with a video.
Oh crap! Okay, got it.
So somebody's got to pay for that.
Okay, and I asked because my best friend they put that tribute band together, the Pink, Gwen Stefani, and Lady Gaga. And it's like, it's a lot in one. So they're asking questions, and I'm like, hang on, let me figure this out. So that's good. Cool.
Well, and I think somebody just asked another question about, all the YouTubers. So so there are so many people on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, doing covers. And it is a crapshoot, right? If the publisher, the artist manager, recording artist manager, because if they own the composition, because the only people that can get mad at you are the composition owners. So if it's Lady Gaga, but Lady Gaga didn't write the songs, then she's got nothing, right? Because you're not using her sound recording or her label sound recording. Now, she wrote the song, then her publishing company is going to come after you.
Yeah, makes sense.
So that's where it gets in, publishers, there's only so many publishers looking on YouTube all day seeing if another person has gone down there and done a cover. YouTube has content ID though. And so YouTube should be able to track if somebody has uploaded something that is owned by somebody else, by a video or a audio. Then YouTube, the content ID through YouTube triggers emails, notifications to the copyright owner. Copyright owner then has to give permission for it to remain up on YouTube and monetize it, remain up on YouTube, don't monetize it, or take it down. And that's YouTube. Instagram, Facebook does not have a content ID that is at the level YouTube does. So that's why they get away with it a little bit more than people on YouTube. And so I think maybe I hope that answered your question. Is it Julian? Julian? And you're welcome. And I hope it was. So you never know. You can do a recording and post it on YouTube and not get caught at all. They can do it forever. And then it's funny. I've worked when I had my music school. I had young teenagers doing covers, and it's actually good marketing. Especially if you give attribution. If you say, this is my cover of, please go check out their website and go download their version of the song, you can get away with it even better, because then you're promoting them and generating more awareness. So that's smart if you're using it. But then I would have them, they're like, why'd they take it down? I've never gotten caught. It was like, well, your luck just ran out. You got caught this time. But there's no guarantee. All right, so we got 5 more minutes. Really great questions, you guys. Thank you. And just going to go through the chat one more time, see if I see anything. Well, I will then finish it up by just saying that, this is the best opportunity for all of you songwriters and recording artists to be creating content. Another thing you'll learn in my class, and those of you that have already been through it, hear me like a broken record. Create content, create content. All starts with brand and content. Your brand can only go so far if you don't have content to back it up, and quality content. So you got to have the content. And then of course, brand. You can't, if you have a bunch of content, but you can't brand it and people don't know how to find it, then, you got to have both. So be creating content and then be developing your brand. Where are you on social media? How can people find the content? And be careful, put out only quality content. Put your best foot forward. Sometimes it's only the first chance that you have with a potential new fan. And if you put something out that isn't your best foot forward, they may never give you another chance. The market is flooded with music out there. And so you've got to stand out. So have a quality, consistent, authentic brand with content that you're proud of and that best represents you. And if it's quality, then it might not be everything that they're looking for, and it might not be the very best thing that they ever heard. But if the brand is something that they can connect with, that is authentic, and the music is at least quality, meaning it's produced and it's quality vocals, and then they'll connect on the brand level and then continue to give you chances and grow with you. And that's what you want. You want fans that are going to grow with you as an artist. So that's my little final bow at the end of copyright. So thank you. Thank you all for joining me tonight. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And if you want to learn more about MediaTech, please come to mediatech.edu, talk to any of our wonderful admissions people that answer all of your questions, and then I hope to see you in class. I get recording artists at the recording program semester 1 and semester 2. So your very first week at MediaTech, you get me, and your second semester too. So 2 whole semesters. All right. Well, thanks, you guys. Have a lovely evening.
All right. Thanks, Crystal.
Crystal Givens. You can find me at Crystal Givens CRISTALGivens.com. CRISTALGIVENS.com. Good night.
Night.